One middle-aged guy tried to work one thing out. One middle-aged guy tried to work one thing out. Hey folks, Dave here from Two Middle-Aged Guys Trying to Work It All Out. And as you could probably tell from the theme song, it's just another solo episode with me. Just one middle-aged guy working on something specific. Not all of it, just one little thing. And I think it's time I come clean with you, our listening audience. You trust us and you want us to tell you the truth about things. And here's the truth. I've been covering for Chris. Chris has, he's absconded with all the TMAG money. He cleared out the funds, the onshore accounts, the offshore accounts, all the money that goes to our charitable foundation. He cleared all that out, took it, and we don't know exactly where he's at. He's going around the country, I guess, or maybe around the world, just spending our money. He keeps sending me these postcards with Carmen Sandiego-like clues about where he's at and what he's doing, but since I know nothing about geography or history, I have absolutely no idea what he's up to and where he could be. So, Chris, if you're listening, I have a message. I'm covering for TMAG right now. I'm covering for the show. I'm covering for all of our financial responsibilities. I'm funding the school that we support in Haiti and the orphanage in India. Chris, they're counting on us. Please come back. Return the money. Oh, folks, I'm just kidding. We have no money. And thankfully, Chris is just really, really sick. I think he's actually near death. But as soon as he gets well, we'll be back with more of our usual TMAG nonsense and shenanigans. But for today, it's just me. I thought I would talk about something that's in our cultural zeitgeist right now. And if you know us here at Two Middle-Aged Guys, Chris and we're always in touch with what's going on in the culture, what the kids are talking about. And right now, in the movie world and in the comic book world, I guess you could say, people are talking about Superman. He's back. People are interested in him. What's with all of the hype around the new James Gunn Superman movie and the reboot of all the DC properties for both film, television, I think even, video games and the animated world, it's become a big deal. People are talking about it. And there's a lot of who is the best Superman. And really, a lot of it is kind of centered around sort of smashing on the Snyderverse and Man of Steel, Henry Cavill, Justice League, Batman versus Superman, really kind of trashing that, using this as an opportunity to trash that and talk about how great they think the new Superman movie will be and the new Superman actor. Or on the other side, it's the folks who love Snyder who are talking about that Henry Cavill is the greatest of all time, and that this new Gunn stuff is never going to touch it. Now the trailer looks awful, and Chris and I did react to the trailer, and if you heard in a previous episode, I had some positive things to say. Cautiously optimistic. I think Chris is less optimistic, but I think that there's certainly some bright spots in that trailer from my point of view. But I thought just real quick I would take a look at Superman in the movies. Superman on television, Superman on screen, live action, of course, won't get into the animated. And I try to answer the question, what makes a great Superman? So before I dive into that, let's just take a quick look at the folks who have played Superman over the years, where they played them, and just sort of give a sense of what that has looked like, to sort of lay this out before I provide my thesis on what really makes a great Superman. So we have had a couple of old Supermen over the years, back from the olden days in black and white. For those of you Kirk Allen fans, and I know there are many rabid Kirk Allen fans, from the original Superman on screen, from the Superman serial. I'm kidding, no one remembers him or saw that. That is currently alive, probably. Or they can remember it, maybe, is another way of putting it. But no, no one remembers Kirk Allen. Old-timey serial stuff, like all the other serial superheroes, pretty cheesy and silly. Although I will say the Captain Marvel serial from the 40s, pre-World War II, actually. It is pretty cheesy and silly, but if you get a chance, check it out. The costume that Captain Marvel is wearing is pretty awesome and a great design for the time, and really, I think could be modernized, comic book accurate to a degree, and also just pretty cool. But really, no one remembers Kirk Allen. No one cares. The other old-timey Superman actor was George Reeves, and people do care about George Reeves, I think, for two reasons. First of all, his last name is Reeves, which is an interesting coincidence, with Chris Reeves, of course, who would later play Superman. But this actor, George Reeves, who was in the Superman television show, not a serial, an actual show on TV, was killed by a fan who, I think, and this could be apocryphal, but the idea was the fan was shooting him to see if he was really Superman. I don't know if that's 100% true, but he was killed by a fan. He was shot. Very weird, very sad story. But if you look at the pictures of him, both he and Kirk Allen are wearing the same kind of pajama-y costumes. They both look kind of doughy, although I think George Reeves did look a little bit more like a comic Superman. Kirk Allen had a weird chin going on. But anyways, listen, the legend around George Reeves and how he died and the fact that he shares the last name with Chris Reeves certainly is interesting, but those guys are not really sort of, in top of anyone's mind when we think of on-screen Superman. Now, big, long wait for over 25 years before we get our next on-screen Superman, which is someone that people remember, and that is Christopher Reeves. Now, Christopher Reeves played Superman in 4 films. 2 of them are considered good to great. Now, I don't have a whole lot of love for the first Superman movie. I consider it kind of cheesy and silly. I do think the second one is much better and more fun, although it does certainly have its cheesy parts. 3 and 4, of course, are a bit silly. Now, I am hard on Chris Reeves' Superman, in large part because of the silliness in the movies, and also because of the costume, and I have made jokes about like a dad in Superman pajamas. That's somewhat true, but really looking objectively at it for the time, for the 70s, late 70s, what they were working with, it actually is pretty screen accurate. And let's face it, Chris Reeves does really, truly look like Superman. For a lot of folks, when they think about what Superman looks like, they're not thinking about a more modern one or even from the comic books. They're thinking about Christopher Reeves. He did leave an impression. He is iconic. Going next, in 1988, is someone that, on a show that you guys might not remember, but I certainly do. I actually watched quite a few episodes of this. Gerard Christopher in Superboy. Now I get it. It's Superboy, not Superman, but still. This was a TV series. It was a syndicated series. Most people don't remember it. It ran for about 3 years. And I do remember it. And I remember one episode in particular because it struck me as funny. Superboy rather, was fighting Dracula. And people tried to use crosses against Dracula, but it had no effect because they did not have true faith. But when Superboy made a cross out of some steel beams that he used his heat vision to put together, Dracula was defeated because Superboy, did in fact have true faith. And as a 10-year-old kid, 11-year-old kid watching this, my thought was, Superman's a Christian? Superboy's a Christian? Did he get converted upon landing on Earth, or perhaps a Christian missionary went to Krypton, and something that maybe wasn't written about in any of the mainstream Christian literature, but we had an extrasolar missionary trip and converted Kryptonians, and his family instilled that in him as a very young child before he was rocketed back to Earth. I don't know, but it did make me wonder about the sort of theology and cosmology in the Superboy universe, if he had the true faith in the cross. I thought it was a very, very funny, and that should just tell you what was going on in my head as an 11-year-old kid or so. The next one, Dean Cain, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures. If you watch the show, Dean Cain did in fact look like a man in Superman pajamas. He doesn't really look like Superman. This show, I've watched very little of it because it was mostly about Lois and Clark and very little super stuff, and it was pretty awful. And then after that, we got Tom Welling playing a young Clark Kent who in Smallville, hence the name of the show, Smallville, and then later on going to Metropolis. Never really suited up except for in the last episode, and you don't truly see him in the movie. This show ran for several years. Tom Welling does, in fact, if you look at him, certainly at the time, he looked a lot like what you would imagine a Superman actor would look like. I never cared for this show, but it does have a special place in many people's hearts, but I don't really think Tom Welling counts as a great Superman because he never really was Superman and wasn't really even Superboy. He was mostly just Clark experimenting with his powers, and, but hey, I think it could have been interesting if we would have got a season with him in the suit actually doing super things. Then, actually, and this movie hit during the run of Smallville on TV, we did get a new cinematic Superman in Brandon Ruth. I always say it like it's Brendan. In fact, I always say most Brandons like they're Brendan. I don't know why. I have an aversion to saying Brandon, maybe. I don't know. Brandon Ruth was Superman, and Superman Returns. This film, oh boy. Brandon Ruth, and by the way, I guess I should just a little bit of context for those of you who didn't know this or maybe knew it and forgot. This was a continuation of the Chris Reeves movie of Superman 1 and Superman 2. It pretended like Superman's 3 and 4 did not exist, which is wise because those are laughably bad movies. This movie picks up where Superman 2 ends several years on after Superman has come back to Earth, after Superman has left in this universe and to find the planet Krypton, realizes it's all destroyed, there's no survivors, comes back to Earth. So it's supposed to be the Chris Reeves Superman in that universe. And Brandon Ruth does look an awful lot like Chris Reeves. In fact, there are times it's like, oh, that's a young Chris Reeves, isn't it? The suit is absolutely awful. It looks terrible. Weird color choices. You've got a nice bright blue with a weird maroon. You've got a very rubbery cape. You've got a way too small Superman symbol. It just looks odd. And it's inside of a movie that's really poor. I think, right? Another silly Lex Luthor, this time played by Kevin Spacey as opposed to Gene Hackman in the originals. Another silly Luthor real estate-oriented plot. It doesn't really put Superman against any true sort of threat, and it's just a very poor film. Then we get another Superman on television, in the CW-verse, and this actually hits around the same time as the next cinematic Superman, so I'll just go first with the CW-verse. And Tyler Hoechlin, I hope I'm saying his last name right. I've read it a lot, never actually heard anyone say it. Tyler Hoechlin, Superman, in the CW-verse. He had several different costumes through his run, was introduced in the Supergirl show. I think that might have actually been on the WB, but WB, the Warner Brothers network, I can't recall. There was a lot of networking, a lot of stuff going on between CW and WB at the time. But at any rate, he became part of the CW-verse where Flash and Arrow and Supergirl ultimately lived. Had his own show that actually just ended here recently about an older Superman with his sons. Looking at him on screen, first of all, his last costume that he wore, and really all the costumes, but certainly the last one that he had, the last iteration of it, was a great television superhero costume. He seems like a fine actor, good enough, certainly. Didn't really look like Superman, but he always has a 5 o'clock shadow too, which is not something Superman ever sported. But still, Tyler Hoechlin, a lot of people have a lot of fond memories of him. I didn't like anything about the CW universe really, but I can't really say too many bad things about it other than, he just doesn't look too much like him, and he's kind of a small guy for what you envision Superman to be. But then you get, or roughly around the same time, you get a new cinematic Superman. You get the Man of Steel, Snyderverse, DC Extended Universe, whatever you want to call it, Superman in Henry Cavill, and he appeared in Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Justice League, cameos, and some other things, but most, I think, Black Adam is the big one where he truly had the cameo. I think others didn't actually show his face, like in Shazam or in The Peacemaker, but Henry Cavill is a Superman for a generation of folks, I think, including myself. To be honest, I have a very, as I admitted my bias against Chris Reeves, I'll admit my bias for Henry Cavill. Fantastic costume, a wonderful looking outfit. Truly, Henry Cavill also looks like he stepped off the page. And he's in a more serious, darker universe where Superman is faced with more serious and darker threats. And I think that sometimes made people feel like it was a little bit too much like a Batman being Superman type, or Superman in a Batman world type role, as opposed to the the Technicolor happiness that you got in the Christopher Reeves movies. Although it wasn't all happy, Lois Lane did in fact die in the first Superman movie, so it's not all peaches in some of the other older Superman properties. But still, beloved by some, disliked by many, is Henry Cavill's Man of Steel. Personally, my absolute favorite. And I think if you listen to the show at all when we've talked about this, it's pretty obvious. I'm admitting my bias there. And then we have our new Superman on screen. In James Gunn's rebooted DC film, TV, animated, and video game universe. And that is David Cornsweet, who looks like, to me, a younger Henry Cavill. He's roughly the same size as Henry Cavill. He's not quite as, I think as ripped as Cavill is, but he's, he looks a lot like him. He's wearing an absolutely awful costume. I think it's just a poor costume. I think the other costumes that we saw in the trailer for other heroes, such as Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, even Hawkgirl, certainly have an interesting look to them that does kind of evoke the Guardians of the Galaxies type uniforms, but it is, they're not so bad, but the Superman costume really does look bad, even in the trailer, even in motion. Maybe slightly better than the still images, but still, it's not great. That worries me a little bit. James Gunn worries me a little bit. I'm hoping he can be restrained. Maybe I should say worries me a pretty good amount. I hope this isn't the silly fart joke Superman that I'm afraid that James Gunn could turn in. I really don't think it will be. I think that Gunn knows that he has to do something different and special and magical with this film. And otherwise, he'll be done before it's even really started with the DCU. So I've got some hope, but, cautious optimism, as I said, is my approach to this. Cornsweet really, truly does look like a comic book Superman. And he doesn't have a whole lot of experience. So you can't look and say, oh, he's had all these other performances. But you look at his filmography, it's mostly, small films, small parts, TV shows. Let's face it, most of us are not familiar with Mr. Cornsweet, just like most of us were not familiar with Henry Cavill. He was in a few things. He was in that Immortals film, which was a Greek mythology type movie. Henry Cavill was. That was the only thing I saw him in before Man of Steel, and that was a poor movie. He was okay in it, but you could tell that he did still look a lot like Superman in it, which was great at the time. I was like, oh, this is the new Superman he's going to be. I just don't have any experience at all with Cornsweet, so it's hard to judge him. So we've looked at the Supermans of the past. Not going to be exhausting in them, and there are iconic ones. Christopher Reeves. I believe that Henry Cavill is also an iconic one. To some people, I don't even think to the majority of people, but to some people he is. I think that Brandon Routh, I did it again. Brandon Routh approached that in some ways by doing his best Chris Reeve impression, but it could have been, had the film maybe been a little bit, or a lot is a better way of putting it, better. And you have other smaller ones that, really just don't rise to that. I think that Tyler Hoechlin, for those that love the CW verse, really do love him. And that's great, right? If you like that, that's your thing. And my understanding is he did a good job. Didn't watch enough of it to really come up with a judgment other than it doesn't look too much like Superman, the whole 5 o'clock shadow thing, shape of his face, all that stuff. So I asked a question at the beginning of this. What makes a great Superman? And I laid out who are the iconic ones, who are some that people just simply don't remember. And I think it's a couple things, but I think it's one main thing. But of course, you have to be a good actor. All of these people that I've listed are, in their own way, good actors, except maybe Dean Cain. But really, truly, they are. They're not going to hire people for these major roles without them being good actors. And I say that even about David Cornsweet. He's probably a fine actor. You would not put a franchise, really a universe, on the shoulders of someone that you did not have confidence in. So I think that you get it out of the way. You got to be a good actor. You don't have to be like a Superman at heart, right? Because, that's what actors do. They take on, that's acting. They take on the Superman persona. I do think some passion for the material is important. Henry Cavill certainly had that. All signs point, and everything I've read and watched, that Chris Reeves also had that as well. And maybe that helps them rise up to the top of the list in many people's eyes. So you got to have that, right? You got to be a good actor. You've got to look like Superman. Henry Cavill looks like Superman, walked off the page. Chris Reeves looks like the Superman of that time, the 70s and 80s. Look at the reference DC art. I believe George Perez did most of that art at the time. That Superman on the page looks like Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve looks like that. And I don't think that Chris Reeves really influenced that. I think it just happened to be that they were just so close. Just like Henry Cavill is just so close. David Cornsweet has that same look. Brendan Ruth has that same look. Tyler Hoechlin, not so much. Tom Welling has that, although it's hard, to really see it because you never see him in the costume. And some of the others not, they're not headliners and they don't quite have it the same. But yeah, so you got to be a good actor. You've got to have the look. You got to have a great Superman costume. Now, I have been, as I said, very critical of the Chris Reeves costume, but I think if you think about it, if I'm objective about it and really put myself in the time, in the 70s and the early 80s when those films were, modern and we were making the good Superman films of that series, it looked like the comic book costumes that were on screen at the time, that spandex, almost pajama-y look. I think Henry Cavill has a fantastic costume. I think Tyler Hoechlin, as I said, had a great costume, especially for the CW verse, especially for television. And David Cornsweet, unfortunately, does have it going against him that he has a poor costume. I'm hoping that that either it improves in the film or in the series, or that it just looks better, or at least you get used to it in the movies. So you gotta be a good actor. You gotta look like Superman, and you gotta have a good costume. Those are all sort of like table stakes that many of these Supermen have. It doesn't answer the question, what makes a great Superman? I'm going to give you my thesis statement, which is this. I believe what makes a great Superman is being in a great Superman movie. I know you're probably thinking, Dave, that's kind of seems obvious, right? But it truly is the deciding point, I think, of what makes a great Superman. People love Chris Reeves. They also love Superman 1 and 2. Now, I do not like 1 very well, but I do have an admiration for 2. I can understand why those films being beloved creates a Superman that's beloved when you take into account all the other things about him looking like Superman, and flying like Superman. I get it. The visuals plus the love for the movie, that makes a great Superman for people. For Henry Cavill, I love Man of Steel. I love Batman versus Superman. I know. And I really like what Snyder was doing with that universe. So when you add that up with the costume, with the actor, with the look and all that stuff, that makes to me, a great Superman. So what does this really come down to? Oh, I should come back to this. Superman Returns. You had a great actor who looked like Superman, who looked like Chris Reeves, in fact. But he was in a terrible movie. And that's why Brandon Routh does not get elevated, I think. Because he could have been a great Superman, but he was just in a bad Superman movie. And so this is what I'm coming to here with this, is a lot of judgment about what's going to happen. People saying the new gun Superman is going to be terrible. That's not my Superman, they'll say. This looks awful. And then other people saying this is going to be the greatest Superman ever. And yes, I have seen many people say that, it's going to be the greatest. Truth is, we don't know. We've seen a teaser trailer. We may have reservations about the actor. We may have reservations about James Gunn. But we really don't know, because I would say that the true test of what makes a great Superman is whether or not this next Superman movie is a great Superman movie. And then we can judge it as a whole and not just on, does David Cornsweet look like Superman? Do I like James Gunn? Or do I just dislike the Man of Steel and the Snyderverse so much that I'm going to like whatever comes after it just to annoy those people? And vice versa, right? The people who love that are going to trash on Cornsweet and Gunn. So that's my point. I hope that this has made you think. If you love Superman, it made you think about, hey, really, what is coming in the future of cinema with Superman? Why do I feel the way I do about certain Supermen? I hope this maybe gives you a different way to think about it. It certainly has helped frame how I've considered it. We'll be back soon, Chris and I, with full, real episodes with the two of us. But for now, signing off, this is Dave. Thanks for listening.